Wow, you guys are the core, okay? I expect big things out of you guys because you came back for this talk, which is really gonna be an overview of why we believe God exists. I just realized, were those fingerprint things on the wall earlier? That's very cool. I gotta start paying attention. Okay. Now, listen, I'm not gonna go back through my entire background with you guys. For those of you who were here earlier, I work in Los Angeles County as a cold case detective. I will just show you the pictures of my kids, though, because I love my kids, right? This is my son, Jimmy, who works at the same agency that I work at, and we have 3 generations. I get to go see this guy on tomorrow night. He's on Northeast Texas in Hughes Springs, Texas, so I get a chance to drive out to see him tomorrow afternoon. Hey, how many know where Hughes Springs, Texas is? You actually know where that is? Very cool. 1,800 people strong. That's what we're talking about. So I'll be there tomorrow night. Okay, now I am going to remind though you guys that we do. I just want you to remember we have this website, and I want you to think about downloading this because this is where we make the case most robustly is on our our phone app rather. And so I want to remind you we do have a phone app where you can download all of this. But we're going to cut to the chase now and let's get right to it. We're going to do what I call Death Investigations 101. If you were here in the last session, we talked about how we determined that a death scene is a crime scene, remember? And we had the dead guy on the floor. Well, we're gonna do that again, only we're gonna turn a corner and use a certain principle I didn't talk about last service that I think will help you to make a case and examine whether or not we think God is reasonable as an inference. And here's how we're gonna do it. In a dead guy in a room again, but we've changed the room slightly. Do you see it slightly different? This dead guy, we're gonna kill a different way. Again, we use this process we call abductive reasoning, right? That's where we determine, based on the evidence, dead guy laying in the room, we make a list of all the reasonable inferences. So we have 2 E-lists, a list of evidence, a list of explanations. And when we list the evidence here, dead guy laying in the face, and then we list all the explanations here. So this is looking pretty familiar, right? This is what we did last service. And we taught you how you can use this process of comparing evidence in the room to explanations for the evidence to determine which explanation is most reasonable. And we know just so far that we really can't cross out anything given what we have so far, just like last service, right? But now we're gonna change it slightly. Now, of course, we said, what if the dead guy was laying in a pool of his own blood? We talked about that. That's the additional piece of evidence. Now we add that to our evidence list over here, and now we've got a different kind of inference. I think we can cross out natural death, given that you really can't find a way to bleed from your center torso naturally. Okay, but then we changed it. Remember how we killed him differently last? We killed him last at service by doing what? We stabbed him, yeah. This service will kill him. What if this time we come in the room and we find him laying in a pool of his own blood, but he's got a single gunshot wound, and it's an exit wound on his back, and there's also a pistol in the room with him. A single casing. Got it? If that is the evidence we have in the room, that changes things. It's an exit wound. Now, if we look at our list of explanations and compare it to the evidence in the room, we added a couple of pieces. It's kind of hard, what do we think we have here? Is this an accidental? I think it could be. What if he's cleaning his gun and accidentally fires it into his stomach? It could be a murder, it could be a suicide. Actually, even with that additional fact now, we still can't cross anything off. Let's go one more. What if we had a note, a suicide note in his own pen, his own hand, with his own fingerprints and DNA on the paper? Some skin cell transfer. Okay, so if we had that, now we have to add that piece of evidence to our list, which we'll do right now. And given that extra piece of evidence, I don't think that's reasonable anymore. I mean, he's got a suicide note. That comes off. But do we know for sure it's a suicide? Right? Could be staged. So let's change our scenario slightly. What if we have a dead guy laying face down, bullet hole, but now instead of having one exit wound, we had multiple entry wounds, lots of casings on the floor, foreign fingerprints, not in his own hand, don't even recognize that handwriting, and this is obviously a California murder because we have a barefoot surfer getting ready to leave the room. This changes things, right? So we'll add these elements, these pieces of evidence to our E list. Here they are. And now the most reasonable inference, it's not suicide. So we can cross that off. Now, we talked about how this is called abductive reasoning. That's the skill set I wanted to teach you last service. Now I'm going to try to teach you a different skill set tonight. We actually determined that this was most reasonably a homicide by using a different technique, which if you didn't think about it, you may not even recognize it. It's some game I call inside or outside the room. So in essence, if we looked at the evidence we have inside the room, we have to explain it. If I can explain all the evidence inside the room by staying inside the room, it's probably not a murder. Here's what I mean. Here we happen to have some evidence in the room. I've got a note, but it's in his hand. It's his stationery. It's his pen. It's his DNA. That's been in the room for days. That's just his stuff. Not only that, I've got a single weapon, which is his registered handgun. It's got his DNA on it, his fingerprints on it. And I've got one bullet hole that he could have shot himself from the front. I can now explain all of this evidence by staying inside the room. And if that's the case, this is going to be something other than a homicide. It's probably going to be either not a natural, obviously, but an accidental or a suicide. What if it's different, though? What if instead I have a note that has not got his fingerprints on it? It's got a foreign fingerprint DNA, and it's not in his handwriting. And inside the room, I also have a pistol that's not registered to him. It's from somebody else, unknown person who doesn't live with him. Unknown foreign DNA and fingerprints on it. And I've got in several cases, it's hard to shoot yourself in the back several times. And I've got footprints that lead out of the room. Well, now I cannot explain the evidence that's inside the room by staying in the room. I have to go outside the room for the explanation. And that changes everything. If this is the case, I've got to consider a homicide. Why? Because if I have to go outside the room for an explanation, I now have evidence of an intruder. Got it? Intruders change everything. Intruders turn death scenes into crime scenes. And intruders also ought to change whatever curiosity you had about why he would have killed himself or how that happened accidentally. If it's a murder scene, this should change into a sense of urgency because you have to now go out and catch this guy, and you've got a short window in which to do it. Make sense? Why did I go through all that with you? Because what if we took the exact same approach and instead of applying it to a crime scene, we applied it to the whole known universe? Now the question is, can I explain everything I see in the room of the universe by staying in the room? We can play the same game, inside or outside the room. If I can explain everything by staying inside the room, some form of naturalism will be fine. If I can explain it with just space, time, matter, the laws of physics and chemistry, then you don't need God to explain any of this. On the other hand, if there are things in the room that I cannot explain by staying in the room, now I've got to consider an external source. What would that be? I think there are actually 8 pieces of evidence in the room of the universe. And these 8 pieces of evidence have to be assessed. And they have to ask the question, is the best explanation for these 8 pieces in the room or out of the room? Of course, like I said, if I can explain these from inside the room, no problem. And as an atheist, I thought for many years I could explain these 8 pieces by staying in the room. On the other hand, if the best explanation is actually external, well, now I've got an issue, right? Because again, I've got evidence of an intruder. Only the problem is the intruder is on a very different scale. And this is really the idea behind this book, God's Crime Scene. The idea here is we're looking at the universe as a room and playing the game of inside or outside the room. And in this book, what I try to do is in every chapter, I'll give you a crime scene that I've really worked. A guy today on Amazon reviewed the book and he gave it a 1. First bad review I've gotten. Why? He says it was too gruesome. He couldn't read it. I didn't think it was that gruesome. Although he has the audio version. I didn't record the audio version. So maybe the audio version is more gruesome than the written version. But I try to give you a crime scene in each chapter and then take that skill you learn in that crime scene and apply it to the universe. That's the nature of this book. Remember, again, we're making a list of evidence and a list of explanations. And if we do this with the universe, we make a list of evidence in the universe and a list of explanations for how we'd explain it. The list of evidence are those 8 things, which I'm going to talk about tonight. And then the explanations are what? You only got one way, inside the room or outside the room. If we're inside the room, it's some form of natural law, natural processes. If it's outside the room, it's something extra, supernatural. Because it cannot be the things that make up nature, space, time, and matter.